Imagine if you found out that one of the most famous people in history wasn't who you thought they were. That's exactly what some South Africans believe about Nelson Mandela. They're convinced he died in prison back in 1985. But if that's true, who was the man we saw walk free in 1990? This isn't just a fringe theory. It's a belief that's been circulating in South Africa for years. Some people are so sure about it, they even have a name for Mandela's supposed replacement, Gibson Manda. You see, this conspiracy theory attempts to explain why inequality persists in post-apartheid South Africa. If the real Mandela died in prison, then who actually led the country to freedom? Of course, this raises some big questions. If true, it would mean that a massive deception was pulled off right under our noses. It would rewrite South African history as we know it. But here's the thing. Is there any truth to this shocking claim? Or is it just a case of collective misremembering? Let's find out. The birth of a conspiracy, tracing the roots. To understand where this idea came from, we need to go back to the mid-1980s. You see, during this time, many people around the world believed they heard news of Nelson Mandela's death in prison. But how could so many people remember something that didn't happen? This is where things get interesting. A paranormal researcher named Fiona Broom noticed that a significant number of people shared this false memory. She coined the term Mandela effect to describe this phenomenon. It's not just about Mandela though. The Mandela effect encompasses various instances of collective false memories about historical events. Now you might be thinking, how could so many people be wrong about something so important? Well, Broom interviewed numerous individuals who claimed they distinctly remembered hearing about Mandela's death. Some even said they learned about it in their geography classes. It's as if an entire alternate history had been created in people's minds. But let's get back to South Africa. The conspiracy theory about Mandela's death in prison goes beyond just misremembering. It suggests that after his supposed death in 1985, the apartheid government brought in a replacement. This is where Gibson Manda enters the picture. According to the theory, Manda was trained to mimic Mandela's speech and mannerisms. He is described as possibly being of Zimbabwean descent and significantly older than Mandela. But here's the catch. There's very little known about Manda's background or identity. It's almost as if he appeared out of thin air. You might wonder why anyone would believe such an outlandish theory. Well, it's important to consider the historical context. The brutality of the apartheid regime left many South Africans deeply traumatized. This collective trauma may have contributed to the belief that Mandela couldn't have survived his imprisonment. But there's more to it than just historical trauma. The persistence of this conspiracy theory is also linked to broader sociopolitical factors in South Africa. Many who believe in it see it as an explanation for the ongoing inequalities in the country. They view it as a reason for the perceived failure of the African National Congress, ANC, to deliver on the promises of true liberation. In essence, the theory attempts to make sense of a complex and disappointing reality. If the real Mandela died in prison, then who actually led the negotiations to end apartheid? Who was really in charge during those crucial years of transition? Of course, this raises even more questions. If true, it would mean that a massive deception was orchestrated not just in South Africa, but on a global scale. It would require the complicity of countless individuals, from government officials to media outlets. But here's something to consider. Could this conspiracy theory be a way for people to cope with the harsh realities of post-apartheid South Africa? Is it easier to believe in a grand deception than to accept that the path to equality is longer and more complex than anyone anticipated? Now you might be thinking, surely there must be evidence to disprove this conspiracy theory, right? Well, you'd be correct. In fact, there's a wealth of information that contradicts the idea that Mandela died in prison. Let's take a closer look at what really happened after 1985. You see, Nelson Mandela's life post-1985 was far from eventful. He didn't just disappear into obscurity. On the contrary, he became one of the most prominent figures on the world stage. For instance, in 1993, Mandela was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This wasn't some secret ceremony. It was a globally recognized event that put Mandela in the spotlight. But let's go back a bit. In 1990, the world watched as Mandela walked out of prison, a free man after 27 years of incarceration. This wasn't just a fleeting moment caught on camera. Mandela went on to lead a very public life, becoming South Africa's first post-apartheid president in 1994. Now, you might be wondering, couldn't all of this have been faked? It's a fair question, but here's where things get interesting. The Nelson Mandela Foundation, aware of the persistent rumors, took an unusual step. They released historical footage specifically to counter the belief that Mandela had died in prison. This wasn't just any footage. It included videos of Mandela speaking his native language, Xhosa, after his release. Now, why is this significant? Well, it would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to train an imposter to speak a complex language like Xhosa with the fluency and nuance of a native speaker. But Mandela's impact went far beyond just public appearances. After his release, he played a crucial role in South African politics. He was instrumental in negotiating the end of apartheid and establishing a new, democratic South Africa. These weren't small, behind-the-scenes actions. They were major political events that shaped the course of a nation. Of course, all of this raises an important question. If there's so much evidence that Mandela lived well beyond 1985, why does the conspiracy theory persist? Well, it turns out our brains aren't always the reliable record keepers we think they are. According to Harvard neuroscientist Steve Ramirez, human brains reconstruct memories, often leading to inaccuracies. In other words, our memories aren't like video recordings that we can play back with perfect accuracy. They're more like stories that our brains piece together, sometimes filling in gaps with information that isn't quite correct. This phenomenon, known as the Mandela effect, has led many people to report vivid recollections that are demonstrably false. Some even claim to remember a funeral or a speech by Mandela's widow from the 1980s, events that simply never happened. But here's the thing. The persistence of this misinformation isn't just a quirk of human memory. It points to a larger challenge we face in the modern world. In an era where information and misinformation spreads at the speed of light, how do we separate fact from fiction? This is particularly relevant when it comes to historical and political figures like Mandela. His legacy is so important, so central to South Africa's national identity, that any uncertainty about his story can have far-reaching consequences. It's not just about getting the facts right. It's about understanding the true impact of a man who helped shape a nation. The power of belief, impact on South African society. Now that we've explored the evidence, let's consider how this conspiracy theory has impacted South African society. You see, Beliefs can be powerful things, even when they're not grounded in fact. And in South Africa, the idea that Mandela died in prison has taken on a life of its own. For many South Africans, this belief isn't just about one man's fate. It's become a way to explain the persistent inequality that plagues their country. Think about it. If the real Mandela died in prison, then who was actually responsible for leading South Africa out of apartheid? This theory provides a convenient explanation for why the promised liberation hasn't fully materialized. But why do people cling to these false memories, even in the face of overwhelming evidence? Well, it turns out our brains aren't always the reliable record keepers we think they are. According to Harvard neuroscientist Steve Ramirez, human brains reconstruct memories, often leading to inaccuracies. In other words, our memories are more like stories our brains piece together, sometimes filling in gaps with information that isn't quite right. This phenomenon, known as the Mandela effect, raises some interesting questions about how we understand history. If a significant number of people can misremember something as important as Mandela's death, what else might we be getting wrong? It's not just about getting the facts straight. It's about how these shared false memories can shape our collective understanding of the past. In South Africa, the impact of this conspiracy theory goes beyond just historical debate. It's become a part of the cultural fabric, influencing how some people view their nation's progress. For those who believe Mandela died in prison, the ongoing struggles with inequality and social justice take on a different meaning. It's as if they're living in an alternate timeline, one where the promise of a free and equal South Africa was never truly fulfilled. Of course, this raises some uncomfortable questions. If people believe that the man who led South Africa to democracy wasn't really Mandela, what does that say about their faith in the democratic process? How does it affect their view of current political leaders? But here's where things get really interesting. The persistence of this conspiracy theory isn't just about memory or politics. It's also about how we cope with disappointment and unmet expectations. For some, it might be easier to believe in a grand deception than to accept that social change is a slow, complex process. In a way, the Mandela effect in South Africa is a prime example of how shared beliefs can shape a society's narrative. Whether true or false, these beliefs have real-world consequences. They influence how people view their past, understand their present, and imagine their future. So the next time you hear someone claim that Mandela died in prison, remember, it's not just about one man's story. It's about a nation grappling with its history, its identity, and its unfulfilled dreams. And in that context, even a false memory can have very real power. Beyond the conspiracy, a new perspective. While we've been debating whether Mandela died in prison or not, we might be missing something bigger. What if the Mandela effect isn't just about faulty memories or conspiracy theories? Maybe it's showing us something about the nature of reality itself. Some researchers suggest that these shared false memories could be evidence of parallel universes. It sounds crazy, right?